class, and gender. Roja's work on oral narratives and cultural expressions of Dalit communities of women in South India and other indigenous communities has resulted in a very well-received book, Spotted Goddesses, Dalit Women's Agency, Narratives on Caste and Gender Violence. I am Dr. Balmurli Natrajan, an anthropologist and engineer by training, who has worked on issues of casteism, labor, and culture in India. I teach at William Patterson University, a working class public university in New Jersey, and take seriously what the radical Black educator, Dr. Bettina Love, names as co-conspiratorial work. So to get this panel underway, our panel, as has been mentioned, is titled #Dalit Lives Matter. It's a theme that sits at the heart of the conference's main theme of reclaiming India in this case. So let us begin, therefore, by hearing from both of you about the title of the conference, Reclaiming India. Reclaiming is, of course, an idiom of resistance to Hindutva, a Brahminical, supremacist, and ultranationalist force that is now clearly fascistic and in control of India. So from your vantage points as activist intellectuals who have shaped Dalit demands for several decades, what is in need of reclaiming by Dalits? What has been lost by Dalits, in other words? What has been taken away from Dalits? And most importantly, also by whom? And over the course of a long history of oppressions, exploitations, and humiliations. So Martin and Roja, all yours.
I can start if that's okay with Martin. I first of all want to acknowledge that I'm sitting on the traditional land of the Seneca Nation, the keepers of the Western Door, the original peoples of the 5 nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. We acknowledge the Seneca community, their elders, both past, present, and future generations. And we acknowledge that many of our institutions were founded upon the exclusions and erasures of many indigenous peoples, including those on this land where I'm sitting right now. And I want to acknowledge my ancestral lands of Sogandi in Tamil Nadu and Chengalpattu district in Tamil Nadu as well. So what was lost? I think for me, in my perspective, I believe strongly, we need to go back to talking about the whole idea of humanity and personhood. So that stands out utmost for me in every conversation that I have and every action that I'm involved in and every piece of writing. For me, the centrality of what was lost was personhood. And once you take that away from somebody, that just causes intergenerational trauma that we see today after thousands of years of endorsing such graded inequality as divinely sanctioned and lodging it into narratives that had potential that was already proven as oral tradition, right? So when there are dominant narratives that kind of stamps it as your brand that you are not a human being, then where do you go from there, right? So once that is denied, then all else is denied for you.
Martin?
Yeah, well, I can say that we're talking about India. So from many, many years before independence, there was a struggle to reclaim the humanity. There was judicial prohibition on Dalits to learn. Severe punishment was inflicted for attempts to learn. You had no right to walk on the roads. There were rules as to how many meters you must walk from others so that your shadow also does not fall. There were no political rights. And the only hope was that if we become independent from the British, then you will become like citizens. So many people, including Jyotiba Phule, and then lastly, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar, he fought on both accounts, on the political independence, not for only Dalits, but for the whole India, and also for Dalits, so that they're treated as human beings. So 1947, India became independent. 1950, we had the Constitution, which for the first time criminalized practices of untouchability. That's closely 7.5 decades earlier. Today, I am coming from a state, Gujarat, not unknown to US people staying in the US from India. Both the Prime Minister and the Home Minister are from this state. So was Gandhi earlier. And it's considered to be the model state. And we did a study on untouchability practices in 2010. It says that though Dalits are Hindus, in 90.2% villages, they cannot enter temples. In 64% government schools, Dalits are seated separately during the midday meal. In 54% of the villages, Dalits who may be elected in the local self-government, but they will not be allowed to sit on the chair, and the water pots will be separate. So you have the two parallel rules going on in India at the same time, the rule of the Constitution and the rule of the caste. We had hoped that the rule of the caste will end in 1947. Unfortunately, all the political parties that we have today, consciously, they tried to provoke and propagate caste as a valid social political system. India cannot, it looks like today, it cannot be reclaimed unless it liberates itself from the clutches of the caste system. That's what I would say.
Thank you so much, both Martin and Roja. Powerful indictments of the very state of our being, and always a good place to begin with acknowledgement of the rot that has very deep roots. So I welcome this, and I want your words to ring loud and clear and travel wide and hit deep. So let's actually continue with that and move directly to the question of equality and citizenship, and of course Manuski, or humanity, what Ambedkar called in Marathi. And in his famous resignation speech that Ambedkar made almost to this date, 69 years ago on September 27th, 1951, outside the Legislative Assembly, Dr. Ambedkar made the following remark, and I quote, "To leave inequality between class and class, between sex and sex, which is the soul of Hindu society, untouched, and to go on passing legislation relating to economic problems is to make a farce of our constitution and to build a palace on a dung heap," end quote. Those are not just memorable words, but they need to be a constant reminder about where we are headed and what we need to do. So Ambedkar was, of course, referring to the Hindu Code Bill and how the votaries of Hindutva at that time violently opposed it. We are today, I would say, in a much worse situation with all the inequalities, social and cultural, all those inequalities intact or even worsened. For example, the Anti-Atrocity Act has been diluted even more. But also many of the economic legislations that were put into place in the early days of the Republic to protect workers and the precariats, and a bulk of them are Dalits and Adivasis and Muslims. Those are also being dismantled very systematically, as with other draconian laws being passed. So what then is the reality of Dalits under the Hindutva regime? what are the possibilities for liberation? Is it, for example, education? Is it conversion? Is it policy changes in the law, social movements? Of course, all of these or something else, and a combination of any of these. I know this is a big question, but I do want us to actually talk freely about this.
Yeah, thank you, Murli, for leading us into this thought right now, because for me, looking at what Ambedkar stood for, what he stands for right now, in his language, he does use Dalit social consciousness about rekindling and reclaiming our humanity, reclaiming equality, and he was about education as well, right? So I want to go back to where I started from, because my comments are going to be centered around this dichotomy of humanized, dehumanized, right? So whose side are we on? And Ambedkar was very clear that you cannot be on both sides. You either are with, you're either like, you know, in hell or in heaven kind of a situation for him. So I think we cannot be both. And if we are, then he points out that there is a personal dysfunction, right? And a collective dysfunction as a culture, so which can only be treated if it's acknowledged and accepted as, yes, we are starting from the premise of a civilization that was founded on inequality. And unfortunately, right, it was lodged into scriptural narrative, so therefore nobody could question it. And so we have clear evidence of language that dehumanizes Dalits and others in the stories that have been passed down to us. So that permanence was ensured to us in the storytelling. And we know the power of storytelling. Once inequality is established in a story that is based and rooted in religious tradition, you cannot erase it. And I think that's what Adichie talks about also, the danger of a single story. And nobody has dared to change that story. So when Dalits are stepping up to say, we want to change that story, you know, we are demonized in the scriptures and the dominant narratives as the other, right? So we want to change the story. And when we step up to release our own language and words to change the story, then we need to be punished, right? So that's the punishment tradition that has been continuing because of this graded inequality institutionally sanctioned by dominant narratives. So, I mean, permanence was just so skillfully and so sophisticatedly done in terms of taking oral narratives, giving it written form, and making sure that it is sort of really engraved on stones where it is indestructible. So it was intentionally sort of, you know, sought after for permanence of these stories. So who dares change the story, right? I mean, if you're from Tamil Nadu, you're probably familiar with the story of the old lady who, you know, who sells the vada, and then the crow comes and takes the vada, and then the fox comes and says, oh, crow, you're so beautiful, sing for me. And the crow sings and the vada drops, the fox runs away with the vada. But somebody decided to change the story and say, well, the crow decided that it was not going to be fooled, and so it put the vada under its leg and sang, right? So that's subversion, right?
Lovely.
So that's subaltern power. And somebody decided to change the story. And that's the story I told my kids when they were growing up, you know. Kaka vade tukit poche, ana nari edthit pola vade, you know. So that's important for us. Somebody has to change the story. And so for Ambedkar, you know, he challenged the Congress party. He says, I make only one condition. He says, tell me what I shared, where I am to have in the Swaraj. If you don't want to tell me that, you want to make up with the British behind my back, he says, hell on both of you, you know. So he did not mince his words at all when it came to claiming inequality and pointing out the fact that Brahminical elites were cohort with, you know, with the British elite as well. So, yeah, so he points that out in such, you know, stark and poisonous language, actually. So, so unfortunately, that's what we're still seeing today, as Martin pointed out, in the school systems, in the health, you know, care setup, And, in political institutions, you still see, underrepresentation and Dalit children being shunned, right? Being shunned still as being treated as inhuman. So we're still fighting that inequality between human and inhuman.
Thank you so much, Roja. Martin?
Yeah, I see there is a fundamental problem. And I think Dr. Ambedkar had understood it very well. Unfortunately, today we don't understand it. And so under the scriptures, under Hinduism, what is upheld to be the ideal is the one who claims that I am the highest one, right? Now that's a problematic thing because to my understanding, where there is no equality, there cannot be any religion. So they themselves under the scriptures say that Hindus are basically unequal. So there's Brahmin on the top and the Kshatriya down, and within the Brahmin there are 40 kinds of people, and 6,000 conglomeration of 6,000 small castes here and there. So people who themselves do not have the religion, to expect that they can help me to reclaim my dignity is absolutely impossible. And therefore, I think that's what Dr. Ambedkar also said, is post-independence. It is not your so-called dharma which is going to liberate you. It is the constitution, because the society must be governed by the law. That's why is the law for the first time which says that all are equal. Otherwise, for 3,000 years, there's the only thing, a written word, saying basically people are unequal. So, the reclamation, as Buddha says, will have to start from the self. I have to reject that very ideology which is enslaving me. It has enslaved my generations. And believe that I'm equal. I'm not lower than anyone. I'm not above anyone. And that led me to define who a Dalit is. And I say, I teach others. Dalits are those who believe in equality. Dalits are those who practice equality. And Dalits are those who protest inequality. So today, we are all talking about India to be transformed into a Hindu Rashtra. What does that mean? It means the imposition of the caste rule to marginalize the constitution. And this is the struggle which is there today. So Roja rightly says that my believing is not sufficient in themselves. I have to create literature. I have to write books for children. I have to change my songs. I have to change my language. Because it is through socialization and through the language that this value of inequality is continued from generation to generation. I was just reading something yesterday which came up. The National Crime Records Bureau in India, they came out with the numbers of people who commit suicide. About 266,000 plus people have committed suicide in India during 2019. But what is important for us that 66.6% of these people who committed suicide, their income was below 100,000 rupees per year. And 24% of these people are the people who are daily wage earners. So you have a religion saying we are all Hindus, but somebody has multi-billion, beyond imagination kind of resources. And somebody is forced to commit suicide because they have no food. There is something fundamentally wrong with the religion, or any religion which cannot address the question of inequality. So whether it is socialization, whether it is our own education, our pedagogy of how to teach our children, all requires to change. And to me, that is a new religion.
Thank you both so much. There is a lot packed in there. So definitely starting with what Roja was saying, reminded me of what the people's historian Howard Zinn talked about, that we cannot be neutral on a moving train. Got to pick sides. And Roja, what a powerful example, illustration of how narratives are crucial in wielding power. Who controls the narrative controls people and society, because they frame the evaluations of social relations and of social actions. I definitely want to pick up on Martin's reference to the law, since that gets us to a question of religion and Dalits, which itself gets into the clearly crucial question of Hinduism, Savarna Hindus, but also Savarna progressive Hindus a little later in the conversation that I want to get there. But I think Martin's very provocative suggestion about who are Dalits should be taken very seriously. And I mean, in my own small way, in my writings, I have emphasized that Dalit is not a caste identity, but an anti-caste identity. And I think we need to have several more ways to kind of unpack this, and by placing the Dalit question at the center of whatever we do. I just want to go back to the law thing a little bit. Ambedkar frequently pointed out again to the fact that for the Constitution, which was so dear to him, for the Constitution to work, that it was necessary for a parliamentary democracy, and I quote from him, where government is all the time on the anvil, so to say, on its trial, responsible to the people and responsible to the judiciary, end quote. So Ambedkar is very careful to note what are the conditions under which a beautiful, fantastic constitution will actually be powerful. And his condition, sadly to say, is not at all the case today, where the government is not on any anvil, doesn't seem to be having or caring for being responsible to the people. And so what then are the limits of the law? What do people do when the law that is meant to protect them fails to do, or indeed becomes, on the contrary, a weapon of the rulers? And a case in point here is the need to identify the perpetrators. For example, the law addresses untouchability very well, but without addressing or naming the problem as Hindutva or Brahminism. So I would just like to hear a little bit on that, and then we can move to the question of religion and liberation that I feel is also very crucially brought out by whatever both of you are saying.
I think I want to go to the language that you're pointing to in the Constitution, where it was very comforting for people to say untouchability is wrong. It sort of gave a moral boost to one's own, I think, self-righteousness or a cultural self-righteousness to say untouchability is wrong. Yes. But however, I'm not going to put it in the Constitution. I'm sure Ambedkar wanted to, but I'm sure he was prohibited, and he was also ailing when he wrote the Constitution, to name it and say, well, let's get rid of the caste system. Practicing calling yourself by a caste identity in itself is illegal. That's what should have been in the Constitution, right? So therefore, we are finding ways and language to just dance around all this language and get away with non-implementation. And any law that you take, law against dowry, right? Or law against even finding out the sex of your child before it's born. People find a way around it because that is what we're used to. That's our cultural norm. And so, as again, I'm going back to where Ambedkar talks about being marginalized within the classroom, sitting on a sackcloth, and that is still happening today, right? And he was very clear in saying that he lists the imperative needs for change, right? To quote from him, he says, our Hindu society must be reorganized on a religious basis, which would recognize principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity. So even though he believed in the Constitution, policy changes and so on, he knew that was not going to happen. Policy change was not going to happen unless we really challenged our roots to say, we want to found our country on liberty, equality, and fraternity. And he says, in order to achieve this object, the sense of religious sanctity behind caste and varna must be destroyed. And the sanctity of caste and varna can be destroyed only by discarding the divine authority of the Shastras. So his personal encounters, personal experiences of untouchability, made it very clear to him. That's why, just 7 weeks before he died, he converts to Buddhism and makes a very clear statement that unless we turn our eyes inward, no change is going to happen. Because for him, every other religion, including Christianity, Hinduism, was looking outward. So for him, he said, let's self-examine. We need to look inwards in order to even start talking about equality. What do we mean by that, right? If we are still seeing children being denied education and women can't even, there's increase of violence against women, against Christians, Muslims. It rose by 57% in the past 3 years alone, just violence against Muslims and Christians. And so it is so clear that more and more this sort of feeling of animosity, enmity, belief in the fact that we need to be divided. We are a country that was founded on divisiveness, and we need to protect that, as Martin says in the Hindu Raj, is just such a dangerous concept to be playing with, because it's lives, and we're talking about Dalit Lives Matter. And it's lives that we're dealing. And yesterday we had a march on our campus, with students marching about Black Lives Matter. And we had white students, students of all color and cultures marching. And that was a great sight of promise for my own institution here, because we are pretty, closed to openly talking about racism and sexism. And so to see that happen is a sign of belief in a better future. So, and it's also great to see how our own communities of young people in India are rallying around, especially around Rohit Verma's death as well. It is bringing out, a certain aspect of fiery sort of reclamation of this is who we are as a nation among the young people, I want to say. But unfortunately, it takes deaths, unfortunately, and suicides and, violence to pay attention to this, including what's happening in America as well. So it's just a universal sort of phenomenon where we have learned to normalize the fact that one person is inferior to me. So therefore, whatever I do to that person is sanctioned by my politicians, it's sanctioned by my religion, it's sanctioned by my culture. So therefore, I will go ahead and do it, even though there are consequences for it, but I will do it to make a statement.
Wow. Roja, very, very powerful point about the role of culture and how we've just got used to it. And the it there is actually a normalization of routine dehumanization of others so that things can be done to them. What frightens me a whole lot more than the lynchings and things like that are just continuously happening, and they have been happening for a very long time, is the bystander culture. And we got to have some way to talk about what is it that doesn't move people, in fact, moves them in the other way. But Martin would love to hear about a little bit about the issue of the limits of the law. Where do we go? What do we do?
Yeah, so let's start a little in the history. And see, we all are aware about the biggest confrontation between Gandhi and Ambedkar. That's in 1932 on the question of the separate electorate. Yes, and Ambedkar had demanded separate electorate for the Dalits. And Gandhi said, we all are Hindus. I don't want division among the Hindus. I don't mind separate electorate for the Anglo-Indians, for the Muslims, for the Christians, but I will not allow for the Hindus. Of course, Ambedkar's argument that prove, give me evidence that we're Hindus. But anyway, if we closely study the document of the Pune Pact, 24th September, yesterday, 1932, on para 2, it says that the law to criminalize untouchability practices will be the first law of independent India, right? And so we had independence in 1947. Under Article 17, we said untouchability is prohibited, is practice of untouchability is a punishable offense. But under which law to punish untouchability, because there is no law. The law came in 1955 called Untouchability Offences Act. And the courts struggled for many, many years because there was no definition of untouchability, and therefore nobody could be punished under the law. So several research and everything, finally in 1976, you come up with a legislation called Civil Rights Protection Act. Yes. Again, it is felt by the parliament that the law is not enough to comprehensively cover the question of criminal behavior and practices arising out of the untouchability. So we need a stronger legislation. And finally, 1989, you have the Prevention of Atrocities Act, what we call the Atrocity Act. Again, if you see that under Section 3, they covered certain offenses which are supposed to be atrocities, leaving many, many practices which are not written down in the law, and therefore, because it is not written there, it does not become an offense. For example, social boycott, when the entire village gets together and forces social exclusion of Dalits, it was not covered under the law, which is a common practice. So finally, law is amended, and you have the latest amendment act of the Atrocity Act in 2016. So it takes you about 70 years, or from 32 to cross across. That's almost 100 years, almost 90 years, and still, if you look at the figures of atrocities, every year it is going up. I did a book last year. Between 2014 and 2018, the atrocities committed on both Dalits and tribals in India, not only in terms of physical numbers, but look at the way, for example, the sexual violence on the women has gone up. Number two, earlier the age of the victim who was raped, she was an adult woman. Now more rape is happening with the young girls who are sometimes 6 years and 7 years old. I came across the story in Uttar Pradesh, the state which has the largest Dalit population in terms of the numbers. Otherwise, in terms of the population, we have West Bengal, Punjab, and then West Bengal. There was a woman who did not go out to defecate in open because it is noticed that whenever Dalit women go out for defecation because there are no toilets, and according to 2011 census, only 36% of Indian population has access to sanitation systems. So when they used to go out for open defecation, this is where the rape happened. So she was so terrified. She defecated in her house on a piece of paper for a month. And the husband would go and throw that packet out. When the government came to know about it through a newspaper report, they declared one toilet for her. Yeah. In spite of all the progress that we made, we are having a moon mission. We are having the best of the fighter jets now, to be very proud of. People, because they have no toilets, they defecate in open, and the people who are to clean are considered to be the lowest and the lowest among even the Dalits. Scavengers. Now ask the National Commission for Safai Karmacharis or the scavengers, and they will tell you that we have no data of how many people are doing this work in the country. In fact, in India, you ask for anything and they say we have no data. Recently in the parliament, they asked how many people died during the COVID, or no data. How many people committed suicide, no data. Right? Well, we are supposed to be the people with one of the most intelligent classes. So much of academics, no research. Ask about the malnutrition, no data. Ask about stratification by sex, no data. Right? So when you don't have the data, how do you evaluate a law, whether it is working or not working? And secondly, let me not limit to the law to the criminal offenses. Look at the civil side. So post-independence, we realized that the root of inequality is into unequal distribution of the economic power. And India being the agrarian society, the question of land was very important because most of the Dalits were landless. So we got two of the most progressive legislations, land reform legislations. In Gujarat, under one of the law, it was estimated that 3.75 million acres of land would be made available for distribution among the Dalits and tribals. After 55 years of implementation, as per the government data, only 1/4 of the land has been able to be given to the people. And that also, if you go actually and see whether people have that land, you will have a problem. We took up one of the largest campaign on land in Gujarat. We went to villages, 250 villages, and we realized that people have a piece of paper saying you have so much of land, but they don't have the actual possession of the land. You have the land on the paper, but somebody has encroached upon your land. Now, how the caste works so far as the law is concerned, I want to stop before just after giving this one is thing. In the US, you have one of the largest contingent of the NRI community, which is the Patels from Gujarat. The Patels were called the Shudras 150 years back. And many communities did not take except water from the Patel communities because they were very poor labor class. There was no word called Patel. But post-independence, because of the successful land reforms that happened only benefited mostly by the community, they got same amount of land, 3.75 million acres of land, which changed the social status, which changed the economic status, and today they are the dominant class in society. The same land reforms which were successful for the Patel community, when it came to Dalits and tribals, there was no political will to implement the same. And therefore, we have a nice saying in India, the elephant has two sets of teeth, one to chew and one to show. Yeah. This is called the rule of the law.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much, Martin, for actually, giving us these kind of telling examples, almost the same amount of land, and the history of what it has done with one community and what it has denied to another. I think there can be no better way to exemplify how also we have become experts at hollowing out many social artifacts, including the law, including land reforms or redistribution in this case. I have had the good fortune to also sit with one of the comrades right near you, Valjibai, and who is also engaged in a similar land for Dalits thing. And I think your example tells me also how to respond to those who say, well, what is the point of Dalits getting land when the productivity of land is, when the productivity of farming and things are decreasing? I think we need to pay some attention very carefully to what you're saying, because we also hollow out the notion of democracy itself when we don't do what you're doing. And of course, now we've, in my opinion, become even worse, because there's not only a hollowing out, there's also a flagrant flouting of the law in open defiance, because there is some level of impunity that is enjoyed by the vigilantes. And that impunity comes from not only the state, but also, I would venture, from communities itself. And this is where it gets into a little bit of what Roja was saying, that I just want to kind of touch upon, that social change comes from within society and culture. And although it surely needs a law to be in place, and Ambedkar famously contrasted Tilak and Ranade in his writings, when he showed how a social reformer like Ranade faced far more difficult situations, whereas one could be a political radical like Tilak, but a deeply social conservative. And so I really think we should not give away this thing about social and cultural change. And that is, I think, what allows me to lead into an obviously big question here, the question of religion and liberation and religious conversion, which you've already referred to a little bit, that needs to be openly faced. There's no avoiding this. So Dalits and Adivasis are, of course, at the center of the issue vis-a-vis Hindutva. Both are seeking their right to practice their own religions and the right to their own identities, which are sought to be craftily crafted, one can say, by Hindutva votaries. And conversion, therefore, hits Hindutva hard. And it makes Dalits and Adivasis into a much sought-after population by Hindutva ideologues and leaders. So how does conversion, as an experience primarily of reclaiming dignity and self-worth, but also as a symbolic act of defiance and resistance. So to what degree does conversion aid Dalits in their quest to free themselves from cultural, social, political, as well as economic oppression? So I really want us to spend a little bit of time thinking about that and hearing from both of you, of course.
Murli, I want to quickly also point to your amazing clarification that you provide for us in terms of how do we understand Hinduism, Hindutva, Hindu, in the context of calling ourselves a ethnic, pluralistic kind of society, which seems to be a lie that we're living into. And I think the most powerful takeaway for me from your writing was to say that Hindutva can be anywhere in any form, right? It can be in your teacher, it can be, you name several things. That's the scariest part. So when you can actually identify something and put your hand on it, you can capture it. But when it is everywhere, it's permeated, it's just so, it transforms itself in several forms, metamorphosis in many ways. And that's what makes it hard. And that's why I think when we look at conversion, we know that people who have experienced oppression in terms of physical violence, psychological abuse, verbal abuse, whatever it may be, I think, at least in the context of my family, my great-grandparents converted to Christianity. And according to my father, it was more about for them, oh, wow, look at this white person who thinks that I matter in some way, right? It doesn't matter like what the white person's intention was, right? It was about, gaining the souls and things like that. But for them, it was, I can't even talk to, my own countrymen. I can't even go into, places of worship there. But here is somebody who's telling me that I'm going to build a place of worship for you, opening up education opportunities and this and that. So they sort of grabbed it in that sense. And I hate to use the word grab, but given the context, I think that was a phenomenal option for them. And I'm like, why wouldn't you take it, right? So, though Christians sort of, Christian missionaries sort of came in thinking that, with very little understanding of the complexities of the ancient nature of the caste system and the caste structure. And in many ways, we do want to point to, the British and Christianity, because we do see caste system in Christianity as well, unfortunately. While conversion happened, the Brahmins who converted, the Kshatriyas who converted, the Shudras who converted, took that into the church as well, right? So we're seeing that, but conversion definitely, when we're looking at mass conversion, it was a social statement, definitely, to say that here is a religion which is rejecting me, and here is a religion that is inviting me. The choice is clear, right? But now, of course, I criticize Christianity a lot, especially when I'm learning about the doctrine of discovery, what it did to Native Americans here. It was all done under the name of Christianity. So all of us have in our religions these versions of extremism that has caused severe damage and still continues to do so, because people who support the right wing also call themselves evangelical Christians, right? So it's very problematic today, but for my ancestors at that time, it was about reclaiming a dignity, reclaiming the right to education, reclaiming the right to, to a concrete house, reclaiming, the right to land owning. So all that sort of came with that package. So that's how I see. And the BJP strategy now of threatening people, because they're afraid of losing their numbers, the Garvhapsi and all of that, where it's reconversion, right? Reconversion, threatening people to reconvert. So there are so many stories that appear in newspapers to tell us how people are, even priests and churches are being threatened to say you have to reconvert. So we have, pictures and stories of people afraid under this BJP rule, so they are reconverting out of fear. So, so conversion is punishable under the law right now, right? As we see that, if you are somebody who eats beef, then that's punishable. So everything that is associated with, attaining some kind of resource, identifying Christianity as a social ladder for minorities, is seen as a threat, and therefore, it's being knocked down.
Thank you, Roja. Martin?
I think Roja has covered some of the points very well. And I can say from my experience that my grandparents also had converted to Christianity. So I was born Christian with the original seed. And I remember at the age of 5, I was put in a small school run by the Salvation Army outside my street. These are the Protestant missionaries from married priests called the Salvation Army, and then we were the Roman Catholics, and every Saturday the nuns used to come and visit our family. And one fine day, one of the nuns asked my mother, "Why don't you put your child in our school? They are one of the best schools we have." And my mother said, "We don't have the money to pay the fees." And my mother was a tobacco worker, and she earned 65 paise per day. My grandmother was working in the farm, and she could make about a rupee. We were 9 surviving brothers and sisters and parents, and my father didn't have much of the income. So anyway, she said, "Well, you are poor Catholics, so you don't have to pay the fees." And the fee was only 1 rupee for 6 months. So I and my elder sister and 3 other children from my street, we were put into one of that missionary school in my hometown. I still remember, I can't get over it, after 55 years. Because we were non-fee paying children, during the break, when other children were playing, we were given a broom in the hand to sweep the school. So the same elements which are there in Hinduism, who are bad people, are the same in Christianity, and same are in other religion also, because they don't understand what is the meaning of religion. If I remember correctly, it was one of the Shankaracharya's, Dr. Kurtukoti, who wrote to Ambedkar. And Kurtukoti was a very known, very educated Shankaracharya. He had got his PhD from Columbia University, Washington University. And he's told Ambedkar that, you're banging your head against the wall. This Hindu religion is not going to change. Why don't you go in search of a religion which is close to your aspirations? And then Ambedkar then goes for Buddhism after almost 21 years of study and reflection. Yeah, he made a declaration way back in, I think, 36. And by the time he converted, it was 56. But Roja has rightly said, we have the Christians, the Syrian Christians and the Dalit Christians. We have the Muslims and the Pashminda Muslims. We have the Sikhs and we have the Ravidasyas. I was in Los Angeles once. I was with Raju. And they came to know, and I think it was from California or something. And they said, no, you have to come and speak at our Gurudwara. And, I had to drive them down with them at least 4 or 5 hours. And to my great surprise, I realized that 17,000 kilometers away from India, in that place in the US, there was a separate Gurudwara for only Dalit converted Sikhs, and no other Sikhs were coming into that Gurudwara. So you have, including Buddhism, yeah, the Dalits who converted are called the Neo-Buddhists. So you have to make a distinction that you are not that person, right? And this actually defies the spirituality, religion itself. Yeah. And if we study literature, neither Paigambar said that, nor Christ said that, nor Buddha said that. But in the name of gods, they rewrite books, they rewrite theology, and say that, yes, what can we do about it? So that's why for a person, I am not for any religion. And I have a problem in my family. My mother she is very religious woman. And I compromised with my own self and took her to Rome when I was receiving Robert Kennedy Award and to meet the Pope. I don't go to church. And my mother, just 7-8 years back, I had a bad accident and I broke 6 of my bones. I fell from something and my mother said, look, you don't believe in religion, right? But you see, it's my God who saved you. I said, yes, ma, your God first made sure that I fall. Yeah? And then saved me. But apart from the humor, look at the study of Natrajan on untouchability. Dalits are Hindus. In 90.2% villages, they cannot enter temples. The very Sikhism, which was born out of the struggle against caste system, has problems. And we made a film called India Untouched, and you can see in the film what's there. So I think whichever religion which came in contact with India or South Asia for that matter, where the caste is, it got infected. Yeah, it lost itself. Not that Christianity has any better history outside India. Yes, it has a very strong relationship with slavery. Yes, but I think actually God has been the biggest instrument to justify the unequal practices. That's what religion is. Yeah, and that's why you have the largest amount of money stored there, amount of gold that goes there, amount of black money can go there. Yeah, because the poor are not there.
Yeah, absolutely right.
Wow. So, I think both of you have so honestly, and actually I would say not just intellectually honestly, but morally honestly, pointed to the fact that all the world religions to which Dalits have turned to, Christianity and Islam especially, but also Sikhism, which we had hoped would be very different because of the way it was also made very explicitly, have turned out to be themselves also having caste practices in its midst. And it's probably less so with Buddhism, but Ambedkar also was very clear, and he had to do that, to call his Buddhism with a different name to distinguish it from what he knew to be Buddhism. And so the problem of caste across religions calls for some kind of a radical theology within each of these traditions. For example, Christian liberation theology, which was in the most, developed in the most impoverished regions of Brazil, for example, the northeastern province of Recife, and which is much hated by actually the Vatican. In the black situation in the US, for example, black liberation theology with the likes of James Cone, Um, all of this points to the existence or the formation of a Dalit liberation theology that is needed by all religions, and not only to be practiced by Dalits, but actually to be internalized by anyone who is a person of faith. It's a kind of a moral code of ethics in action for all believers. And Martin, I share some of the relationships that you have with your own family. I too grew up and I was brought up in a family of still continuing to be devout Hindus, and I learned a lot, and I still treasure my own knowledge. But I also, as I've become more reflexive and more self-critical, but also part of it is my own anthropological training that allows me to not look down at those who believe, even if I'm not a believer. And I think that is important. Why do people believe what they believe is, to me, to be always kept at the center. And I have taken my mom to Banaras and things like that, and because I know the meaning of it, but I try to shape some of those meanings, and I fail. Most of my life has been a failure in that way, but that doesn't deter me. So I do want to come to the question of Savarna Hindus.
All right. I hope people are still around, and we did need to stop it somewhere there. I believe there's about 20 more minutes, and we were just getting into the question of the Savarnas. So the entire the link would be shared, I believe, by the organizers with anybody who's attending, and so you should be free to see the rest of it. But I did want it now to go into the Q&A. We do have a few questions here, and I think a couple of them have been answered, and I would invite both Martin and Roja to weigh in as and when you deem it ready for you. So the first one is about the coronavirus and what it has done to discrimination. And I also want to say that along with that, maybe there's another thing about the recent book by Isabel Wilkerson, which is titled Caste, and its subtitle is The Origin of Our Discontentedness. And interestingly, it's entirely about race. But there is a question about what you could say about that. Let me just take these two first, Martin or Roja. Maybe Martin can take the coronavirus thing.
Yes.
Sure. Yeah, I think as happens in all calamities, whether natural or human calamities, that the poor gets the maximum beating. And Corona has impacted Dalit lives very badly. Right now, we have taken up a program in about 8 states where we have identified 1,000 women-led families. And we want to assure that they get ration for 10 months, next 10 months. So there are thousands of people, or several hundred thousands of people who have lost their livelihoods, and it's a big thing. It's a big thing, and not many facts are coming out. Surprisingly, in these times, the atrocities also have gone up. And recently we saw the whole case of Hathras, about which Angela made the statement, which we saw in the beginning of this program. So financially, but more than financially, I think also what is something which has come about is the utter lawlessness. So people's lives are at risk. And okay, so the most or something that really shakes us apart is the state itself will take that role to crush the dissent of the people. So we saw in Hathras, people who are protesting, they are put behind bars or they are threatened. I was just telling a friend yesterday or some journalist that if you see the dead bodies which are in large numbers in the hospitals, and who disposes these bodies? No one except scavengers. No technology, the same old technology. And nowhere their role is recognized. Okay, so I think Corona has impacted lives very badly, and it is going to continue doing it for a long time. Well, that's what I would say.
Thank you, Martin. Roja, on Isabel's book, take that.
Yeah, sure. I haven't read it fully, but I know that it is very important. And she actually got the seed for the thought of that book from attending a caste conference. And I'm not sure if you were at that, Murli, but she had a good conversation with the Ambedkarites in Boston, and that's how it was born. So yes, I think it's a very significant book at a significant time.
Yes, I would just like to add that yes, it is a searing critique of race, and it is a stunningly rich book filled with metaphors, and she has in one sense made it impossible to keep caste and race separate. We know that, for example, caste travels wherever South Asians migrate. Caste also travels, so does casteism. But Isabel's book is an anti-caste, anti-race project. And in that way, she has, done a grand job of it. There are ways in which one can take it forward. And I believe that there's at least one question which is coming from the Facebook side about how can we pass down the message of Dalit Lives Matter to the elected officials here in the United States to get their attention. And that ties in a little bit with another question, and I would like Roja to actually pick up both of these, at least initially, is how do, about the graded inequality, I would love to hear a little discussion on how we, both individually and collectively, can stop upholding cultural norms in a variety of ways, large and small. So both of these, one is about what to do in the diaspora, about Dalit Lives Matter, and the other one is about what we could do individually to break some of these norms. And both Martin and Roja could pick up the second one at least. Roja, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think this whole conference, the people who are behind this panel, putting this together, the Reclaiming India conference that happened, and a lot of coalitions, collaborations are happening, as we speak among different Indian diasporic groups across religion, caste, and all kinds of, socially constructed identities. So which is a promising time right now for us, because we are really, really battling fascism in its worst possible incarnation, I would say. And so, yes, so the diasporic community, Indian diaspora community, really needs to step up and be bold about making their statements against Hindutva ideology. And I'm very encouraged to see there is an organization called Students Against Hindutva Ideology. And then we have Hindus for Human Rights. We have ICWI, which is India Civil Rights Watch International. And we have so many scholars and academicians who are stepping up with a stronger voice now, because we are seeing the really the ugliest side, right, of Hindutva. So that is happening. So thanks for bringing note to that. Talking about cultural norms, and I think one of the most interesting books that I'm reading and I'm teaching my class right now is How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. And I think he gives very concrete ideas and thoughts and plans as to how can we provide an antidote to racism, right? So in many ways, we are the antidote as long as we know how deep to dip into it and how to form alliances, right? It's all about forming allies. So it's not about, when he talks about racism, he says the opposite of racist is not non-racist. The opposite of racist is anti-racist, right? So therefore, the same way, when we talk about casteism and being casteist, it's not just about being non-casteist, for a feel-good kind of a feeling for the moment, or, oh, I've done this, I've done that, so therefore, I'm a great person, I'm a Brahmin, but I did this, and so on. So that language in itself is problematic. So therefore, we need to be very intentional about being anti-caste, which means let's own it, right? So he talks about, a non-racist is somebody who would take criticism in an offensive way and just try to back out, try to be very defensive about it or stonewalling, right? But an anti-racist would definitely accept and acknowledge and be willing to learn and be willing to change and taking those concrete measures. So I think a lot of what is happening right now among the Hindu community is a good example of being anti-caste rather than just saying, oh, I don't believe in the caste system, or, I'm colorblind, things like that. So that intentionality is really important. And I think deinstitutionalization, one of the problems that has really happened in the world, as Martin puts it, is that the institutionalization of religion, brings in this whole idea of hierarchy. And it's just, I just can't get, my mind around that. The very hierarchy that we are really battling against is what we are worshiping. So deinstitutionalization and questioning, not being afraid to question from within the system, as Hindus for Human Rights are doing and several other, groups are doing, is important. So that's important. And then using more and more the language of depoliticization, right? Of any kind of faith system, or even depoliticization of the human body, is such an important thing that we need to do. Because look at America as well. I mean, we're at the height of sexualization of women's bodies. I mean, sexual objectification of women's bodies in commercials and music videos. And we are supposed to be the most progressive country, with the women's suffrage movement and so on. But we are so backward when coming to talking about objectification of women's bodies. And so we have learned to commodify and go along with capitalism and the market economy. So unless we decapitalize and politicize bodies in our daily life, starting with our homes, starting with our small communities, starting in our writing, in our academic language, even moving away from language like, oh, that's not fair, which means fair is always associated with being right, So the colorism is huge, changing our rhetoric in terms of color and gender language and so on will be a place to start.
Excellent, Roja. I am also conscious about time, so I'm going to do the following. I'm just going to club a few things and offer it to Martin. So Martin, you are right now in the midst of people celebrating Diwali. So there is a question about what, if anything, would be a message for those celebrating Diwali. And definitely our own conversation here is also an attempt to commemorate Diwali in a very different way by actually forcing us to think about some of the deep rot within. But I want to club a couple other things for Martin. There's a question about asking you to talk a little bit about your own efforts to write children's books, because that's part of the long-term cultural work of changing the narrative. that was mentioned. And a final thing to add on to that was another question about the current state of the atrocities, the Anti-Atrocity Act, and what can we expect from that. Sorry to place all of this, Martin, but I know it's getting really late for you, and we would be so happy to hear some of your concluding thoughts.
So let's start with Diwali. Diwali is the festival of light, right? And light is something which defeats darkness, but not without a price. The oil has to burn out, and the cotton has to burn out to produce the light. And I think this is the message, that caste is not the problem of Dalits. Caste is the problem of entire Indian society and entire humanity. If we think that this is going to affect Dalit children, sorry, it is going to affect each and every child that is under the rule of caste. Yeah. So even to save the future of our children, yes, we have to think about it. And I think we to join up with the thing further is, we mentioned about Book of Isabel. And what I liked about her book is that in such a nice, simple way, through a lot of stories and anecdotes, she has brought out a beautiful similarity between what race and caste is. And that reminds me of, I met an African-American professor some years back in Geneva in a conference. And the man was relentless, saying there is nothing called race in America. We only have class. It went on for maybe half an hour, but the man said, no, there is only class. And finally I said, Professor, can I ask you one line question? I said, yeah. Given the choice, a beggar in the US would prefer to be white or the black. And he says, I have not thought about it. I think the hypocrisy or the energy that we use to keep up the hypocrisy, it's at a solid cost. If we are simple and plain and accept that there's a problem, it'll be easier to solve it. And I found it very nice way to resolve the thing is through books of children. Because children, they're very innocent. They don't have prejudices, and they will tell you on your face what they think about it. And I remember that, I wrote a couple of books for children, about 17 so far. And when some of these books had gone to a village, a Dalit child and a Kshatriya boy, a child, they both were touching one another and grows completely reading the book. And somebody went and told the father of the child that, your child is touching that untouchable child. The father came furious, separated both the children and went home saying, thinking I have done my religion. When the school resumed, both the children were not to be found. And after a long search, they found that the washroom was locked from inside. When they opened, both the children were reading the book together in the washroom. This is the power of the knowledge. If it is rightly written and beautifully crafted, and we have about more than 1,000 libraries all over the country. We run classes. In the evening, children come there, gather, they speak about what's happened with them in the schools. So library is a medium which also allows you to survey the schools, what's happening, the discrimination, so it's. But this is the conspiracy. Jyotiba Phule and Savitri Phule, who did the pioneering work about giving literacy to the Dalit children, they are hardly mentioned in the textbooks of India. Or for that matter, any progressive, whether you take Achyutanand or whether you take, Periyar or take any amount of people, their stories are completely taken out. So when I reflect back, when I was a child, the kind of stories on communal harmony that were there in the textbooks, today they're completely missing, right? I think we have to do is get back to the basics, do contact with the children. And on 3rd of January, actually right now I'm very busy because I'm doing the book on Savitri Phule's life for children. And we have taken up a mission to reach the book to 100,000 children. So we are starting from 3rd of January, her birth anniversary. But these are the stories, which are to be told to the children, because you're taking out the entire history and you're trying to create a new history, which in any case has such a short life and not a very credible one. So I think that would be my, comments.
And what a note on which to end it. We are waiting in expectation for many more books from you that do change the lives of ordinary people, real people. And I cannot thank both Roja and Martin enough, and the organizers, for having made such a thing possible. In the interest of time, I do have to wind things down, but thank you, audience, for hanging in there. Jai Bhim, and be well.
Thank you to everybody. Thank you so much, Murli and Martin. What a privilege.
Thanks
to our audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Murli,
Thanks, Raju.
Roja.
Yeah.
Very engaging conversation. A lot to follow up on.
Have you stopped the webinar?